I thought the new transfer student just wanted friends, until he started mentioning memories from my childhood he was never there for. When he first joined our class, nobody paid much attention to him. Transfer students weren't exactly rare, and usually people acted interested for a few days before everything returned to normal. At first, he seemed quiet, not awkward, just observant. The kind of person who listened more than he spoke. Eventually, he started sitting near me during lunch because we had a couple classes together. It felt natural enough. He was easy to talk to, surprisingly funny sometimes, and honestly seemed like someone trying hard to fit into a new environment. So I didn't think much of it when we slowly became friends. Looking back now, I keep replaying those early conversations in my head, trying to figure out when things first started feeling wrong. But that's the problem. Nothing seemed wrong at first. If anything, he was unusually good at making people comfortable. He remembered details people mentioned casually. He listened carefully, and somehow, he always knew exactly what to say to make conversations feel personal fast. At first, I thought that just meant he was socially smart, until the comments started. Small things. Random details that caught my attention for a second before I brushed them off. One day, he mentioned my old childhood dog during a conversation about pets, not by name, just casually saying, "Didn't you used to have a black dog when you were younger?" I paused for a second, confused, before assuming maybe someone from school mentioned it somehow. It wasn't impossible, so I answered normally and moved on. But then it happened again. A few days later, he brought up the park near the neighborhood where I grew up, not just the area. Specific details about the playground there, the broken swing set, the basketball court with faded lines, things most people wouldn't randomly know unless they'd actually been there. I remember laughing awkwardly and asking if he used to live nearby. He shook his head immediately. No, just heard about it somewhere. The answer felt strange, but not strange enough to push further. Still, something about the conversation stayed with me afterward, because the details weren't general. They were specific in ways that felt personal. And once I noticed that feeling, it became harder to ignore when it kept happening. Slowly, he started mentioning things connected to my childhood. More often. Places, habits, small memories. I barely talked about it anymore. Every single time, he acted casual about it, like none of it was unusual. And every single time, I tried convincing myself there had to be a logical explanation. But eventually, the explanation stopped making sense. Because this wasn't information people at school would know. Some of the things he mentioned were memories I hadn't told anyone in years. Tiny details even my closest friends probably wouldn't remember about me. And the more it happened, the more uncomfortable I became around him without fully understanding why. Then came the moment that changed everything. We were sitting outside after class talking casually, when he suddenly laughed about something. You used to hide behind the old storage sheet near your apartment whenever you got upset, right? The second he said it, my entire body went cold. Because that wasn't just a childhood memory. It was something deeply specific, something private, something nobody should have known unless they had physically seen it happen. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh and explain it was some weird joke, but he didn't. He just looked confused by my reaction. "How do you know that?" I asked quietly. For the first time since I met him, he hesitated. Only for a second, but it was enough. "I don't know," he said eventually with a nervous smile. "You probably mentioned it before, but I knew I hadn't." I knew that immediately. Because it wasn't the kind of memory people casually bring up in conversations, especially not one tied to moments I used to feel embarrassed about as a kid. After that day, everything about him started feeling different. Every conversation carried tension underneath it. Every random detail he knew suddenly felt disturbing instead of impressive. I started paying closer attention to the way he spoke, hoping to catch some explanation hidden in his words. Instead, I only noticed more things that didn't make sense. He knew the layout of my old neighborhood despite claiming he'd never been there. He recognized names from my childhood before I properly introduced them in stories. And somehow, he always acted like these details were completely normal for him to know. The worst part was how calm he stayed while I became increasingly uncomfortable. Like he genuinely didn't understand why any of this bothered me. One night, I sat awake replaying every conversation we'd had since he arrived at school, trying to figure out where this information could possibly have come from. Family, old social media, mutual connections, but none of the explanations fit completely. Because knowing facts about someone is one thing. Knowing memories is different, especially memories connected to moments nobody else was supposed to witness. The next day at school, I looked at him differently for the first time. Not like a new friend anymore. Like someone carrying pieces of my past he should never have had access to. And in that moment, one thought became impossible to ignore. Either he had been connected to my life far longer than he claimed, or somehow he knew things about me that no stranger should ever know at all.